I never expected the DMV to be where I'd meet someone who'd change how I think about fate. Or at least, that's what I told myself while I was sitting there, third in line, watching the minutes creep by like they were moving through molasses. You know the DMV, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that weird mix of stale coffee and cheap plastic chairs, and the endless parade of sighs and muttered curses. It's the kind of place where time goes to die, and patience is tested harder than any exam you could imagine. There I was, clutching my number ticket like it was a lifeline, B47, and staring at the little digital screen that stubbornly flashed, now serving B35. The guy in front of me was grumbling under his breath about his expired registration, and I was just trying to stay calm, reminding myself I needed to renew my license before my road trip next month. But then I noticed him. He was sitting right next to me, a couple of chairs over, not that close, but close enough to catch my eye when he shifted in his seat. He had this kind of nervous energy, like he was both annoyed and resigned to the whole waiting game. Dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it more times than I could count, and eyes that kept darting toward the screen with this mixture of hope and frustration. I caught him glancing at me once, and I think he caught me smiling at the ridiculousness of it all. His name was Alex, as I found out when we both reached for the same crumpled DMV brochure at one point. He laughed, this short, easy laugh, and said, "Looks like we're in this together." And that's when I realized something weird was happening. What should have been the most mundane, soul-pleasing ordeal was suddenly interesting. We started talking, first about the usual DMV stuff, how terrible the wait was, how nobody seemed to know what they were doing, the fact that the air conditioning was either blasting or off with no middle ground. But then the conversation drifted into other places. Music we liked, weird childhood memories, the dumbest mistakes we'd made on road trips. For a place that's all about bureaucracy and boredom, it felt unexpectedly human. 3 hours later, yes, 3 hours, because apparently that's how long it takes for the DMV to do literally anything. We were still there, still talking, still somehow laughing, despite the endless delays. There was this moment when the screen finally flashed his number, B48. Only one number after mine. And right before I was about to call my number, he said something that made me stop and wonder if this ridiculous day might turn into something more than just a story about a long wait at the DMV. He said, if this is how we met, I think I could get used to waiting in line. And just like that, the line felt a little less like a line, and a little more like the start of something I wasn't ready to let go of yet. I couldn't help but grin at him. Yeah? Well, I'm not sure the DMV is exactly the best place to start a romance, but hey, stranger things have happened. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how awkward it was that we'd been talking for hours in a place designed to please me the life out of you, but it felt kind of nice, like a weird little bubble far removed from the chaos outside. He laughed again, that same easy laugh, and said, "I'm Alex, by the way." Extending his hand felt almost silly, but I shook it anyway. Matt. The handshake was firm, the kind of handshake that didn't feel forced. Just genuine. Our numbers popped up almost back to back. Mine first, and then his. But as I stood up, something inside me hesitated. This was the part where we both would get called to the counter. And then, that was it. The moment would be over. Like a random interaction in a cafe or a bus stop. Nice, but forgettable. Alex must have noticed because he said, "Hey, since we've been stuck here for so long, how about grabbing a coffee? I know a spot just around the corner." I thought about it for a second. Normally, I'd have brushed it off. After all, who wants to extend something that started at the DMV into real life? But something about the way he said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world, made me nod. Yeah, okay. Coffee sounds good. We walked out into the late afternoon sun, the building's harsh fluorescent vibe replaced by the warm hum of the city. The coffee shop was small and cozy, with a few indie posters on the wall, and a playlist that was entirely too good for a place that cheap. We ordered our drinks, him black, me some complicated iced thing I can never remember the name of, and found a corner table. The conversation picked up where it left off, but suddenly the stakes felt higher. We weren't just killing time anymore. We were actually interested in each other. I found out he worked in graphic design, which I'd always secretly admired but never really understood. He told me about this project he was obsessed with, designing an album cover for a local band that had this gritty, raw vibe. I talked about my job at a bookstore, the daily rhythm of recommending books to people, and sometimes getting lost in my own little world among the shelves. At some point, the coffee got cold, but neither of us seemed to notice. It was one of those rare conversations where time disappears and you feel like you've known the person forever. Or maybe it was just that ridiculous DMV wait turning into something unexpectedly perfect. There was a moment when Alex looked at me, really looked, and said, "You know, I didn't expect to meet anyone here today. I was just dreading the whole thing." Same, I admitted. I was ready to spend the afternoon staring at peeling paint and pretending to be interested in the guy behind the counter. He smiled, a little shy now. I'm glad I was wrong. I felt my heart do that stupid little flip that people always say about crushes, but you never expect to happen to you. I laughed to cover it and then blurted out, "Maybe next time we should meet somewhere less soul-crushing?" "Agreed," he said. And then, after a beat, "So, what's next for you?" "Road trip, you said?" I nodded. "Yeah, planning to drive up the coast. Thought some time away from the city would do me good." "I've always wanted to do that," he said, eyes lighting up. "Maybe I could tag along?" I blinked, surprised. "You're serious?" "Yeah, I mean, why not? Could be fun." It was tempting, unbelievable even, but also kind of thrilling. The idea of packing up and driving somewhere with Alex made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Here I was, completely unprepared for any of this, but suddenly it felt like the right kind of crazy. Before I could say anything, he added, "Look, no pressure. Just throwing it out there." I smiled, feeling something warm spread through me. I liked the sound of that. For a moment, everything felt simple, like the universe had conspired in the most ridiculous way to put us next to each other for 3 hours, and then maybe, just maybe, something real could come from it. We finished our coffees, stepped back out into the early evening air, and the city felt a little less big, a little less lonely. I didn't know where this was heading, but for the first time in a while, I was excited to find out. We walked out of the coffee shop together, and the city was starting to turn that soft gold you only get just before sunset. There was something about that light, less harsh than midday, more forgiving, that made everything feel possible. I glanced over at Alex, who was fiddling with the strap of his backpack, looking a little quieter now, like maybe the exhaustion of the day was catching up with him. So, I said, trying to sound casual but secretly hoping he'd keep talking, "This road trip, are you serious about tagging along? Because I'm not exactly a seasoned tour guide or anything." He chuckled. "I wouldn't expect you to be. I'm not exactly a wilderness expert myself. I just thought, well, maybe it's easier to do this kind of thing with someone else." It was funny how comforting the idea of not being alone on a trip could be. Normally, I'm the kind of guy who likes his space, but with Alex, it felt different. Less like I was sacrificing freedom, and more like I was gaining something. "Where exactly were you thinking of going?" he asked. "I'm thinking of heading north, up the coast. Maybe stop in some small towns, see the ocean, hit a few cafes, maybe drive without a playlist just to see how long I can stand the silence." He laughed. "That sounds almost poetic for someone who works in a bookstore." "Hey, I'm full of surprises." We walked down the block, the sidewalks humming with the usual evening crowd. People rushing past, lost in their own worlds, while here we were, two strangers who had somehow turned a DMV nightmare into a spark neither of us expected. We paused at a crosswalk, and I watched him again, his face lit softly by the street lamp, eyes focused on the other side of the street, but somehow always drifting back to me. I knew that look. It was the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in a crowd. So I said, "Do you want to exchange numbers? I mean, if you're serious about this road trip thing." He smiled, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and makes your heart skip. "Definitely." We pulled out our phones, and as I typed in my number, there was this weird moment where I realized how much I wanted to believe this wasn't just some fleeting random day. That maybe, just maybe, I was on the edge of something real. After that, the conversation started to wind down slowly. We knew it was time to part ways, but neither of us wanted the day to end. So we walked for a little longer, just talking about small stuff. Favorite movies, the kind of pizza-topping debates that somehow feel important in moments like these. At the corner where we were supposed to split, I stopped and looked at him. "Hey, Alex, thanks for, making the worst day ever actually something else." He laughed. "Yeah, thanks for not running away when I started talking about album covers." I grinned. "No promises I won't embarrass myself more later." He bumped my shoulder gently. "Can't wait to find out." We said our goodbyes, and I watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling like I'd just stepped into a story I wasn't ready to stop living. That night, lying in bed, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "Hey Matt, I found a playlist for our Silent Drive experiment. Spoiler, it's all 80s synth pop. Hope you're okay with that." I laughed harder than I should have, and texted back, "Deal." I don't know what the future holds, but if that 3-hour DMV wait taught me anything, it's that sometimes the most unexpected places bring the best surprises. And for once, I'm willing to wait and see where this goes. The next few days felt strange in the best way possible. I kept finding myself glancing at my phone, half expecting another message from Alex, even though, honestly, we'd already texted enough that it didn't feel weird anymore. The kind of texting where you don't just say, "Hey," or "What's up," but actually talk about stuff, like what songs we liked, weird stories about our families, or that one friend who always shows up late for everything. All the little things that build a weird kind of intimacy over a screen. He was easy to talk to, and more than that, he made me laugh. A lot. Like that one time he sent me a picture of his dog, who looked completely over it, wearing a tiny party hat, with the caption, "My only true emotional support." I replied with a picture of my cat giving me the cold shoulder, and suddenly we were in this ridiculous battle of pet sass that stretched for hours. Somewhere between those texts, our road trip plans started to feel less like a joke and more like an actual thing. We joked about packing lists. He was a minimalist, I was a chronic overpacker, and I told him that if we were going to survive 3 days in a car together, we'd have to negotiate everything from music choices to snack preferences. He promised to bring chips and a good attitude. By the time Friday rolled around, I was both nervous and excited. I'd spent the morning double-checking my car, making sure the tires were okay, and mentally rehearsing how I'd bring up certain topics without sounding like a total nervous wreck. When Alex showed up at my place around noon, backpack slung casually over one shoulder, and that same easy smile, I felt my chest tighten in that familiar way. "Ready for our great adventure?" he asked, grinning like this was the most normal thing in the world. "For better or worse," I said, unlocking the car. We threw our bags in the back, and as soon as I started the engine, the car was filled with that 80s synth pop playlist he promised. The first song came on, all neon and nostalgia, and I glanced over to catch him singing along quietly, head bobbing. The road stretched out ahead of us, a ribbon of possibilities, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world was just this open space waiting for us to fill it. We slipped into an easy rhythm. Alex in the passenger seat, pointing out little landmarks or telling stories about cities we passed, and me driving, trying not to mess up the turnoffs or get us hopelessly lost. There was a comfort in the silence, too, those stretches where we didn't say much but just listened to the music and the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The first stop was this tiny coastal town that felt like a postcard come to life. We wandered the streets, grabbing fish and chips from a hole-in-the-wall place and sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean. The wind was salty and cool, and Alex pulled his jacket tighter around him. "I could get used to this," he said softly. "Me too," I admitted, watching seagulls wheel overhead. We didn't do anything dramatic. No grand gestures or perfect moments, but just being there felt right. Later, as we walked back to the car, our hands brushed and neither of us pulled away. The touch was electric, like a secret promise we didn't quite need to say out loud. That night, we found a tiny motel a few miles off the highway. It was nothing fancy, no ocean view or plush bedding, but it had a sense of quiet that made everything feel bigger somehow. In the dim light of the room, we sat on separate beds for a while, talking about hopes and regrets, the kind of conversations that usually happen after midnight when you're too tired to hide what you really feel. At some point, Alex asked, "Do you ever wonder if we're supposed to meet people in certain places? Like, that day at the DMV, did it have to happen that way?" I thought about it, about how absurd it seemed that a place designed to frustrate could lead to something that might actually matter. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe we just have to be open to it when it does." He smiled, and I felt that familiar flutter again. "You're pretty good at being open, only because you make it easy." There was a pause, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd said too much, before he shifted closer. Our eyes met, and there was this quiet understanding between us, this moment where the world outside disappeared. And then, finally, his hand found mine. It was the kind of touch that feels like coming home after being lost for a long time. No rush, no pressure, just two people who'd stumbled into each other's orbits and were willing to see where it led. We didn't need words to fill the space. The night stretched on, and with every heartbeat, it became clearer that maybe this trip was about more than just the road or the destination. Maybe it was about the people you meet along the way, and the moments you never see coming. Morning came with the kind of quiet that felt almost sacred, like the world had paused just for us. I woke up to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint light slipping in through the thin motel curtains. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything from the night before. The way his hand fit in mine, the way his eyes held mine like we were the only two people in some secret universe. It all felt both surreal and utterly real at the same time. Alex was still asleep beside me, his breathing steady and peaceful. I studied his face, messy hair, eyelashes long enough to cast tiny shadows, and felt this surge of something I didn't quite have a name for. Protection? Wonder? Maybe just that warm, nervous excitement that comes with the beginning of something new. Eventually, I nudged him gently. "Hey, sleepyhead, time to wake up." He groaned softly but opened his eyes, blinking like he was adjusting to a new world. "Morning," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I said, smiling. "You hungry?" I was thinking we could find a spot for breakfast before hitting the road. He stretched, that lazy way people do when they finally decide to leave the comfort of a bed, then nodded. "Yeah, that sounds good. Nothing too fancy, though. I'm still full from last night's chips." We got ready, throwing on whatever clothes were clean and managing to laugh at how little we cared about looking perfect after 2 days on the road. Outside, the sun was already climbing higher, painting the sky with pale blue and wisps of white clouds. The town was waking up too, and we found a tiny diner with plastic booths and a smell of fresh coffee that hit you the moment you walked in. We slid into a booth by the window, and the waitress gave us a knowing smile that probably said, "You two seem like you're on some kind of adventure." I ordered pancakes. Alex went for eggs and toast. And for a while, we just watched the world outside while waiting for our food. The conversation floated easily between us, talking about favorite childhood memories, the weird quirks of our families, the movies that made us cry, and which ones we'd never admit to loving. It was like we were stitching together pieces of ourselves, slowly revealing parts that usually stayed hidden. After breakfast, we got back in the car, the playlist still going strong. This time, the silence between songs wasn't empty. It was comfortable, like a shared secret. The drive took us further along the coast, through winding roads that hugged cliffs and dipped into valleys filled with wildflowers. At one point, Alex suddenly pointed to a narrow dirt path leading off the highway. "I know this place," he said excitedly. "There's a hidden beach down there. Almost nobody knows about it." I raised an eyebrow. "Hidden beach? Sounds like a good detour." He grinned. "Come on, I'll be your tour guide." We pulled the car off the main road and bumped along the dusty path until we reached a small, almost private cove with waves gently lapping against the shore. The sand was soft under our shoes, and the air smelled like salt and pine. We kicked off our shoes and wandered down to the water's edge. The chill of the ocean was shocking at first, but it was that kind of cold that wakes you up, makes you feel alive. We stood there for a while, side by side, watching the horizon stretch endless and wide. I stole a glance at Alex, who seemed lost in thought. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. but there was a softness in his eyes. Yeah, this is nice. Far from everything. Yeah, I agreed. It's easy to forget how big the world is when you're stuck in your routine. He turned to me then, a little nervous, like he was gathering courage. Matt, can I ask you something? Shoot. Have you ever, been scared to start something new? Like you want it, but you're afraid it won't last or you'll mess it up? I thought about that for a second. All the time. I think that's kind of normal, isn't it? Yeah, maybe. He hesitated before adding, because I don't want to mess this up with you. My heart skipped again, and I realized I probably wasn't doing a great job hiding my smile. Hey, I said softly, the fact that you're worried about that means you care. And honestly, I'm a little scared too, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. He reached for my hand, fingers intertwining with mine without hesitation. Deal. We stayed on that beach until the sun started to dip, casting long shadows and turning the sky into a canvas of oranges and pinks. The drive back was quieter, but in a good way, like we'd shared something that didn't need words to explain. That night, back in the motel, we sat on the little balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars blink awake. Alex leaned his head on my shoulder, and I felt all the nervousness of the past weeks dissolve into something steady and warm. Maybe the DMV was a terrible place to start a story. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where we were supposed to meet. The next morning, I woke up to the soft sound of waves crashing somewhere in the distance. I blinked against the pale light, filtering through the curtains, and turned toward Alex, who was still asleep. His face relaxed, like the weight of the world had lifted off him. For a second, I just watched him, feeling this quiet happiness settle in my chest. Eventually, Alex stirred, stretching with a yawn that made his whole face scrunch up in this adorably sleepy way. Morning, he mumbled, voice still thick with sleep. Morning, I said, smiling. Did you sleep okay? Better than I expected, he admitted, rubbing his eyes. I don't usually do this spontaneous stuff, but I'm really glad I did. I felt that same warmth wash over me. Me too. It's crazy how a random day at the DMV turned into this. He laughed softly. The DMV? That place is the worst. Who would have thought it could lead to a road trip and this? He gestured vaguely around the room, like the whole trip was hard to put into words. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Breakfast was easy. A quick stop at a roadside cafe with terrible coffee but amazing pancakes. And then we hit the road again. The playlist was back, the familiar synth-pop beats filling the car as the highway stretched out before us. We talked about what we wanted to do next, tossing around ideas for detours and places to see. Alex suggested a small vineyard he'd heard about, and I was game. There was something refreshing about moving without a rigid plan, just letting the road decide where we'd go. Pulling into the vineyard felt like stepping into a different world. Rolling hills, rows of grapevines basking in the sun, and a small tasting room that smelled like oak and dust. The owner greeted us with a warm smile, and we spent the afternoon sampling wines and laughing at how terribly we both failed at describing flavors. Alex was surprisingly good at it, though. He somehow made earthy with a hint of blackberries sound poetic instead of pretentious. We ended up sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the vineyard, sharing a bottle of the owner's favorite red. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden glow all around. I reached for Alex's hand without thinking, and he squeezed mine. How do you feel about all this? I asked quietly. He looked out over the vines for a moment before answering. Honestly, I'm scared. Scared of getting too close, of hoping this isn't just a fling or some weird fluke. I nodded because I felt it too, the pull between wanting to dive in and the fear of getting hurt. Yeah, but I think it's worth it. He smiled then, that little half smile that makes your heart skip. You're surprisingly optimistic. I have my moments, I said, teasing him gently. We stayed there until the evening settled in, the sky turning a deep, dusky purple. On the drive back to the motel, the silence between us was comfortable, filled with the kind of connection that doesn't always need words. That night, we found ourselves sitting on the motel's tiny porch again, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars blink awake. Alex leaned his head on my shoulder, and I felt all the nervousness and uncertainty from before melt away. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. So, he said after a while, breaking the silence, "What happens after the trip?" I turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess we figure it out?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I like that." We sat there for a while longer, just breathing in the quiet night air, the sound of crickets filling the space between us. It wasn't perfect, and we didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The road trip wasn't just about the places we visited or the music we played. It was about two people who met in the most unlikely place, taking a chance on something that could be real. And maybe that was the best kind of adventure there was. The last morning of our trip arrived quietly, with that same soft light slipping through the curtains and a calm that felt different from the nervous excitement of the first day. We didn't speak much as we packed up the car, just moving together in this easy rhythm that felt like a language all its own. Before we pulled away from the motel, Alex turned to me with that familiar, shy smile. "I guess it's back to real life after this." "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of those words more than I expected. "But maybe real life can be a little different now." He nodded, and for a moment, I thought he was going to say something more, but instead, he reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for taking a chance on all this. On me." I smiled, squeezing back. "Thank you for making the worst DMV experience the start of something I didn't see coming." The drive back wasn't silent, but it was quieter in a way that felt comfortable. Not the nervous chatter of strangers, but the calm companionship of people who'd shared something real. We talked about the places we wanted to visit next, the songs that had become the unofficial soundtrack of our trip, and the small things we'd noticed about each other along the way. When I dropped Alex off that afternoon, outside his apartment building, I felt this strange mix of sadness and hope. The kind of feeling you get when you don't know exactly what's coming next, but you're excited enough to want to find out. He looked up at me, eyes bright with that same easy warmth. "So, does this mean we're officially road trip buddies?" I laughed. "Definitely." He pulled me into a quick hug, then stepped back with that playful grin. "Maybe next time, we pick a less soul-crushing place to meet." "Deal," I said, watching him disappear inside. Driving away, I realized the trip hadn't just been about the coast or the music, or even the unexpected company. It had been about opening up, about letting someone in, even when it's scary, and finding out that sometimes the best things come from the most unlikely places. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, the windows open to a cool breeze, and pulled out my phone. There was a message waiting from Alex. "Hey Matt, thinking about our next adventure already. You in?" I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing back, "Always." And just like that, what started in a windowless DMV waiting room had turned into something real, something worth taking a chance on. Maybe life wasn't about avoiding the long waits or the frustrating days. It was about what you found while you were stuck in them, and I couldn't wait to see where the road would take us next.